Before we start cleaning our clock parts that we have here, I want to talk a little bit about the cleaning process. I'm going to talk about the system that I use and why I have this system here. But first, let's talk about some of the alternative clock cleaning solutions that are out there. One type of clock cleaner is made from petroleum-based cleaners. Very strong, does the job great, all that type of stuff. However, if you read the bottle carefully, it talks about using it in a well-ventilated places. A lot of people in their basement, maybe garage where they're working on clocks, don't have that flexibility. But those petroleum-based cleaners are rather dangerous. You don't want to breathe their fumes and vapors and odors and all that type of stuff. You can avoid it. And you also don't want to get it on your hands. So again, we're trying to be safe for the clock. We're trying to be safe for the clock maker as well. After petroleum-based products, there's ammonia-based products. And again, does a great job cleaning a clock. One thing to be cautious about with the ammonia base is, again, breathing it. It's got very strong fumes and vapors and odors associated with it. And if you're going to be doing cleaning by hand, especially, you don't want to breathe all of that ammonia smell. It just isn't good for you. So again, that's a concern I would have with ammonia base. So what I use is something from the company called Polychem, and the reason I use this is because it's simple to use, it does the job. We've cleaned many dirty clocks with this product, and they come out very clean and shiny. We've even used it on some of the museum mechanisms across the street, and again, it's done a great job there. Now, the problem with the DOX 007 is you need to use the Polychem number 2CB rinse as well, because that neutralizes this cleaner. There are no strong vapors or odors. And the big part with this product, it goes right down the drain when you're done. So when your solution becomes contaminated, gets awfully dirty, you can just pitch it right down the drain. You don't have to recycle it specially like you would the petroleum-based products. So with that said, what I'd like to do is take the clock parts that I have here and put them through the cleaning process so you can see how I accomplish that. First thing, I've got a couple of baskets here that I'm going to be putting the plates in, as well as the wheels. I've got the pillar nuts for them, and I'm just going to take a T diffuser and put those in there so they don't get lost. And with this being a little bit on the dirty side, I'm going to put this in the first container here, which is the pre-cleaner. So this is where I take spent fluid from my ultrasonic cleaner, put it in this pre-clean tub first, and then I'll replenish this here. I wanted to talk about wearing safety gloves first, but I was talking about other things. I got a little distracted. But when you're using cleaning fluids, even though this is rather benign as far as what the solutions are made up of and do, it's just to protect yourself a little bit extra, I use gloves as well. These are nitrile gloves, and they're good against protecting you against most harsh chemicals that are there. So our pre-cleaner, I'm just going to agitate that a time or two. Got my long set of tongs here. Agitate that a time or two. And then it's all going to go into the ultrasonic cleaner. Now, if you don't have an ultrasonic cleaner, you can clean these parts with a toothbrush, with other bristle brushes that are out there, in order to get as much of the dirty, solidified oil off as you can. I even use a cork where I can rub on that, not too abrasively, on the plate, for example, and get off some extra discoloration. These aren't too bad, so I'm just going to do the pre-cleaning here and set them in the ultrasonic cleaner. Typically, I give them about 10 to 20 minutes, again, depending upon how dirty they are. This ultrasonic cleaner has a built-in heater, automatically comes on as you're using it, and that does speed up the process. While we're waiting for this to finish, I did want to mention with the DOX 007, you mix it with 1 part of cleaner and 7 parts of water. So this does go quite far after purchasing a gallon of it. Well, we're just about at the end here of the ultrasonic. I'm going to help it along so it turns off. And after being operating for about 20 minutes or so, you can see there's some foam up at the top there, and that's normal with this product. If I turn this back on, you can just about make out there's some vibrations going on in the cleaner. You can see little bits of standing waves, standing water that's being agitated by the ultrasound, the ultrasonic cleaner. And that's how this cleans the products. It cleans the parts by having that cleaner and water bounce against these pieces of metal to get them as clean as possible. So if you ever do get an ultrasonic cleaner, make sure it has those standing waves there, otherwise it may not be operating properly. Once this turns off, I'm going to take it to my first rinse, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Get as much of the solution off as I can. And here's the other basket. Again, let that kind of drip as much of the cleaner off as you can. And this first tub here is nothing more than distilled water. Nothing more than distilled water. Sometimes in the summertime, I'll take and use dehumidifier water that I capture from the air as we're dehumidifying the basement. You can see that this water is a little bit cloudy now because we've been running a lot of cleaning processes through here. So what I do here is just a quick rinse to take off as much of the dirt and sediment as I can. Get as much of the cleaner off as I can. And then I go to the Polychem rinse. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So let me repeat what we've done so far. We've had a pre-cleaner, get the heavy dirt, dust, and particles off. We've had an ultrasonic cleaner. And again, that's something you can do by hand, especially with this solution, since there's not all these nasty vapors that you might be breathing. You could use a toothbrush, something as abrasive as the end of a cork. After about 20 minutes, that comes out of the ultrasonic cleaner. I go into a distilled water rinse. Why distilled water? Some tap water can have a high content of lime in it. And if you get a little bubble that maybe stays on the piece of metal, you may get a stain. And those of us who've had plants at home, when you water the plants and you see that white crystalline material there, that's all lime from your water. We don't want to get that in this process. Then we go to the Polychem Polytech number 2CB rinse. So that's what's in my second tank here. And it says in the directions to leave this in that tank about 30 seconds. And the reason is we want to neutralize the DOX 007 cleaner that was in our pre-cleaning tank as well as our ultrasonic. So this has been in about 30 seconds, give or take. Let that drip off. And then I take it to a final rinse. So again, this container here is nothing more than distilled water. So this tank and this tank distilled water, notice how much more of the dirty solution, how much of the more of the particulate comes off in that first rinse than the last one. So again, distilled water. Now the purpose of drying this as quickly as possible is we don't want any rusting to take place. So that's when you need to be aspirating pretty fast to get this out of the final rinse and into the dryer. Now that we have the clock parts in the final rinse, I'm going to take them out, let them drip a little bit here. And it's going to get kind of loud here. I'm going to turn on the dryer assembly that I have. And there's a lot of different ways you can dry parts for clocks. This is a commercial one that was purchased some time ago, but I've seen people use a hair dryer setting on high and some type of a metal tin, such as a big pretzel tin, such as a popcorn tin, that type of stuff. But as soon as this comes out of the cleaner, the rinse I should say, I'm going to use a little compressed air to blow off the big drops of water. I start from the top and work to the bottom. And get as much water off just so there's no drips on it and drops that might just leave a stain. So let me get the second container here. This one has the wheels in it and other pieces, parts. And I'll do the same thing. This has the 4 pillar nuts in it. Another wheel. Hour tube. Escape wheel. This is the minute wheel for the motion works. And then lastly, the back plate. I'll close this now. And it's funny, everybody always asks me, how long should it be in the dryer? Well, the bottom line is as long as it takes. I'll check to make sure there's no drops of water anywhere, and I'll give it a good 30 minutes just to make sure all the moisture has been baked out of there. The last thing we want, no rusting to take place. We just don't want any rusting at all. So that's why I kind of let this do its job and come back to it after about 30 minutes. So now the clock has been cleaned. So we just got our wheels and plates out of the cleaner and the dryer, and I thought it'd be a good time to just kind of make an assessment of where we're at here. As you can see, I like to kind of sort things out. Once you become more adept at this, you probably won't need to be so particular, but I've got here this little tray here has got the stuff outside of the plate, pendulum bob, key, the hands, screws for mounting the movement and the dial. So I just wanted to show that to you again. The plates, we are keeping this one wheel in here, this center arbor wheel, because otherwise I have to remove this pinion here, and sometimes that is a very difficult procedure. I'm making an assessment here as I look through this. I don't see tremendous amounts of wear. I am going to show you how we polish this particular pivot here, which it needs a little bit of attention. And we also have to do cleaning again here, because that first clean, that first run through the cleaner didn't get it as clean as I'd like it to be, but it's okay for us to proceed with what we have to do now. Again, here are our wheels, our pendulum, suspension spring, and our escapement, which we'll talk about. And I think you can probably see here as I rotate these wheels around, you see some dark spots yet. So these wheels did not come out totally clean, so I'm going to run them through the cleaner again at some point to make sure we get them as clean as need be. But the last piece or last part that I want to talk about right now is the mainspring. And this is how the mainspring came out of the plates, came out of the movement. Remember I talked about the round mainspring clamps, and there's also a flat one. The flat one does take up less space, less real estate, and especially for clocks that have plates that are very, very narrow and tight together, it's nice to have those flat clamps. So that's what I use. That's what I used on this one. But what we need to do now is open this mainspring up so we can properly clean it. And that's when I'll run these components back through again to make sure they get even cleaner, and perhaps I might have to do a little pre-cleaning with them. So that's what we need to do next. You really need to consider, when working with mainsprings, of getting a mainspring winder. I'm going to show you a particular type of mainspring winder referred to and called the Ollie Baker. There are other ones out there, but that one does work quite nice, and that's what we have here in the School of Horology. Through all of this, I've been trying to make good notes so I know how the escapement and different pieces, parts go back together in our movement. But at this point in time, what we're going to do is take this mainspring, great wheel as it's sometimes called, and take that over to the cleaner and get it clean. Once it's cleaned, we'll talk about all these little pieces, parts that are here. So let's go to the mainspring winder. Hi, we're here at the mainspring winder. This particular mainspring winder is an Ollie Baker model. There's other styles out there, other models, other brands, but this one works very effectively. You do need to have the letdown key in order to use this particular mainspring winder. Some of the other ones have a chuck in there that you can tighten down on the winding square, but this one uses the letdown key set. So just a couple of things regarding safety with the mainspring winders. This is an example of what can happen with a clock and the mainsprings. You can see that this one has broken over here, and this side over here, a little bit harder to see, but this has also broken. Both of those mainsprings are broken. And there's so much energy there, you can see it's starting to separate the case. So that's how much energy is pushing out. So if this was the job that we had to do, we'd have to be particularly careful in removing this movement and getting those mainsprings out. With barreled mainsprings, they can fail in some different ways, and we're not going to be talking about barreled mainsprings today, but here's an example where the mainspring has broken about midway through its spiral. And then here is just a crazy break that took place with this mainspring. So what I want you to learn from this particular barreled mainspring is these mainsprings can fail catastrophically and more than just one break. So that's something to keep in mind. That's why we'll always be using some type of eye safety protection. These can go right over glasses, and these are just regular safety glasses. For me, I have these I picked up at one of the big hardware stores because they have magnification also lenses in it. So that works for me rather well. You need to have a leather glove to help protect the mainspring. Now in this particular demonstration, I'm not going to be covering the mainspring with the glove quite as much as I would have if I wasn't being recorded, but I'll certainly kind of go back and forth with that glove to make sure everything is working properly. If I do have a question about a mainspring as far as safety and perhaps failure of that mainspring, I'll even go an extra layer of protection for my eyes and my face. This is a chemical splash hood, and this will fit on top of my head and give me that extra protection just in case the mainspring catastrophically fails. So this is the way the mainspring has come out of the clock movement that we're working with. I have a flat mainspring clamp on it, C-clamp sometimes it's called. And what I want to do is remove this clamp so I can open up the mainspring so we can take it to the cleaner and get it all cleaned and re-lubricate it, inspect it before we put it back in the clock. I have my safety glasses on now, and I'm going to install this into the mainspring winder. You need to be careful always to look at the mainspring winder to see which way it winds. With the Ollie Baker, there's a ratchet assembly, and you can use that ratchet assembly in one direction or the other, and it'll hold it in place. And that's a nice feature with the Ollie Baker. Some of the other ones have a metal bar that comes through to hold the handle in one particular location that you want it to be. Well, for now, I'm going to tighten this mainspring so I can remove that C-clamp. My safety glasses are on. I've got my leather glove on. I'm looking at the end here, and I need to rotate the handle this way to tighten this clamp, to tighten the mainspring so I can slide the clamp off. So let's do that. Normally I would have this completely covered like so, but because of the camera I want you to see what's going on, and I won't cover that, or I'll cover it intermittently. So let's tighten this down so I can remove that C-clamp. Okay, it's loosened up, and I've got the C-clamp, and I can take it off just like so. Now I have to let the energy out of that mainspring. I'm going to let it unwind, but I have to do that in a controlled fashion. I'll take a little bit of tension off of the ratchet assembly so I can flip the ratchet the other direction and slowly let this uncoil. Periodically checking it to make sure it's not spooling over. Notice I'm not standing in the same plane as the mainspring. I'm off to the side, just in case there's a catastrophic failure. Once you see the mainspring fall back to the opposite side, pretty much all the energy should be out of it by that time. See what I mean? See how that fell back to the other side? There may still be a quarter of a turn or something like that of energy left in there, but pretty much negligible. So I'm going to loosen the pillar here and remove this. Notice the loop end goes into the post here, and the arbor goes into that hole there. So now I've got my mainspring, energy released, and I can take this to the cleaner now before I inspect it fully and lubricate it. All right, we are back at the cleaning solutions here because I wanted to give everything an additional clean. This is my pre-cleaning tank here, and again, if you're only cleaning by hand, you can take and soak your different components from the clock. In this particular case, I've got the wheels and the plates in here. You can use a toothbrush if you still have some embedded solid dried lubricant. Don't forget to get the lantern pinions, get those nice and clean as well. And this will make sure that everything is perfect when we go through the rest of the process. So I've got my wheels here. And I also have plate assemblies here. And sometimes with the plate assemblies, toothbrush works effectively, getting all the dirt and grime off. Sometimes I go a step further, which is using a cork. I get one end of the cork wet from the solution, and I'll just move that around on the plate. It's a little bit more abrasive, but not too much, to take off any additional residue that might be there. And that was the front plate, and here is the back plate. Some of the staining won't come out. You'll just have to live with that. But we do want to get it perfectly clean as possible. All the old lubricant out. Sometimes I'll take a toothpick to go into the pivot holes there as well in order to get them clean. The other component we need to deal with is the mainspring. And the mainspring, again, you'd want that to soak a fair amount of time. You want to check a couple of different places on the mainspring. One of them is the click and the click spring. And that's this mechanism here. Because the click and the click spring is containing all the energy from the mainspring, you've got to make sure that that is operating properly. Make sure that will operate and hold that mainspring when it needs to be held properly. Now, as far as cleaning the mainspring, sometimes you can get away with using the toothbrush technique, scrubbing on both sides, going a little bit at a time. Some people use a plastic scrubby in order to get off additional debris, old lubricant. And as you're doing this, I'm kind of feeling carefully to make sure there's no sharp edges, something that might be leading to a crack. So I'll do as much of this as I can to get off all that extra lubricant. Some people use steel wool. I don't use steel wool unless I really, really have to, because all those little pieces of steel wind up in the solution. So I'll take this little scrubby and take it as far as I can to the center of the mainspring. Sooner or later you'll reach a point where you can't go any further, at least safely getting to those inner coils, and that's when I'll switch from that back to a toothbrush and try to get as much of that material out as possible. Once you get this good and clean and perfectly dry so it can't rust, we'll wind up going and polishing pivots and burnishing pivots.